Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. I'm really excited about this one. It's a great topic and a great speaker, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Keep Calm and Secure Your CI/CD Pipeline. Our speaker today is Sonia Moiset, who is lead security engineer at Photobox and tech lead and security manager at Pride in London. Sonia, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. I know you've got a great webinar presentation on tap, so I'm going to put myself on mute and let you get right into your presentation.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Keep Calm and Secure Your CI/CD Pipeline. So I'm Sonia. I usually wear dark hoodies and listen to too much synthwave music, so I'm a legit security engineer. So first of all, to introduce what is cybersecurity and why is it important. So cybersecurity is the techniques of protecting computers, networks, programs, and data from unauthorized access or attacks that are aimed for exploitation. And to give you a little, I took three main cyber attacks that we could actually face. So you might be familiar if you're using GitHub with that page that sometimes happened, the pink unicorn. This is when they're having a 500 service status error. So this happened in 2016, where a series of DDoS attacks were launched against DNS servers, and GitHub, PayPal, Spotify, Twitter, and other services have been down. So you might ask, what is a DDoS attack? Which is a good question. So usually an attacker would actually launch commands to a botnet, so it would zombify and botify hundreds, thousands of infected hosts, and will target a specific server which exhausts the resources. So this is why you would see, for example, the pink unicorn on the GitHub website. So this is scary. How is it possible? So you have a website called Shodan, which is a search engine for the internet connected devices. And what you would do, for example, in that case, I've typed the keyword webcam. As you could see, these are all the webcam connected publicly on the internet and accessible. So this is quite scary, obviously. This is an example of just clicking on one of them. Obviously, I've redacted for the purpose of this presentation, but this is one of the CCTV that you could find. This is located in Canada, just to give you an example of one of those webcams that are connected publicly. This is really scary. Another cyber attack that is well known is ransomware, a WannaCry attack, where you had more than 100 countries that have been targeted by this attack. So what is a ransomware attack? So basically, an attacker would send a phishing email, and the user would click on the link. On the background, you will have the malware that will impact and execute. So depending on that payload and malware, it will encrypt the data, and the attacker would like you to pay some bitcoins to get the data, the key, and the data decrypted. So as I said, there are more than 100 countries that have been targeted with the ransomware WannaCry. Another cyber attack that is usually done called sextortion. So you can see the blur part is actually the password, and in that case, the attacker would send you an email saying that he has installed on your machine a malware Trojan that will actually feed them through your webcam, and he's just bluffing, saying that he's been watching you doing naughty things, and that he will send it to your family, your employers, and all those things. The way for him to stop it is to pay him bitcoins. It's the same thing as the ransomware. Obviously, this is a scam. This is not real. To check if your emails have been compromised through a data breach is to go on a website like Have I Been Pwned? And instead of, in place of ilovedevops.com, you could just put your email address and you will have all the websites where your account have been breached. So how data breaches occur? So usually this is just one scenario about an attacker can look for weaknesses on the website. So he could do this by 3 ways: through social engineering, through phishing email, through phishing and other ways, or just looking for weaknesses on the infrastructure. So it could be through SQL injection, looking for vulnerabilities that he could exploit on the websites. When he managed to do this, he will exfiltrate the data and sell it, because the data is a way for them to get finance and money back. This is just to use some examples of companies that actually suffered data breaches, so quite a lot, and I'm pretty sure you're familiar with a lot of them. And you can see also it covers all industries. In cybersecurity attacks, let's funnel down to web application attacks. So just a quick question for you to think: which company actually suffered from a web app attack with only 22 lines of code? I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to think about which company is actually have been victim of that. It was actually British Airways. So in 2018, British Airways announced that they have suffered from a data breach. They've noted that almost 400,000 customers could have been affected, and that the stolen information included personal and payment information. So the payments through his main website were affected. Payments through mobile apps were affected. And this was only made over a couple of weeks, if we look at the timeline. So what's happened in that case? We know that the customer data were stolen directly from a payment forms. And this was the same type of cyber attack that happened when Ticketmaster UK reported a breach. It was exactly the same pattern. And we know that MageCard was the main suspect, because they were the same group that did it for Ticketmaster UK. So you might ask, Mage who? So MageCard is a consortium of malicious hacker groups who target online shopping cart systems to steal payment card information. This is known as the supply chain attack. So what was the entry point, you might ask? It was actually a JavaScript library, modernizer, and more specifically the version 2.6.2. And you could see, if we had a look at the codes, at the end, the attackers actually added the snippet of code. Usually they're doing this because they don't want to break the functionality of the whole code base. So the change was at the bottom of the script. And the server sent what we call last modified header, which indicates that the last time a piece of static content was modified. So if we're having a look at the top, this was the original one in 2012. A look at the bottom, this was when it was tempered with the payload in 2018. And this is the snippet of code, only 22 lines, that actually performed that attack. So for those of you it's not familiar with that, so basically the attack was when the user just clicked the button to submit their payments, the information was fetched from the payment form, instructed along with their name, and sent to the attacker server. As you could see, the endpoint that they've actually registered. So the baways.com, this was their endpoint where they were fetching all the information from the customers. What about the apps, you might ask, because we know that that was the entry point for the websites. So a portion of the application is native, but the majority of its functionality loads from web pages from the official British Airways websites. I know that in mobile programming, you could actually use functions, so depending on the OS they're using, so it would be WebView for Android and WK WebView for iOS. This would allow you to inject JavaScript and web pages within your native mobile app. So if we look at the source of the web page, it's the same CSS and JavaScript components as the websites. And we're back to the same issue because they're using the modernizer 2.6.2 version that is compromised. At the end of the day, we know that BA was fined because of a GDPR and under GDPR for a data breach. we can actually see the example on GitHub with credentials, environments, variables, tokens, API keys. So we know that GitHub is housing thousands of publicly accessible keys, tokens, passwords, search results. So I did a quick test yesterday. You can also do it on GitHub. You can type API keys, credentials, password. You will have a lot of results. This is just an example with the API keys. So you will have keys for services including Google, Twitter, AWS, Azure, Facebook, GCP, all the services that we know. Just to give you a couple of examples, this is some of the developers that have actually pushed some API keys on GitHub. Unfortunately, because GitHub is based on history, it is saved even if you change the and push or remove them from GitHub. The only way is to prune the repo and completely delete it and recreate the repo. So make sure that there's no trace of the API keys on it. And there was actually a case on Uber that one of the developers actually pushed API keys on their public repository. What is web application security and SSDLC? So web application security is a branch of APPSEC that deals specifically with security of websites, web applications, and web services. And a secure software development lifecycle process ensures that security activities such as we say, penetration testing, code review, threat modeling session, architecture, and others are actually an integral part of the development efforts, which means that the security is a continuous concern for all the stakeholders. And there's also an early detection of flows. And then there's a cost reduction because you don't need to fix all of the security issues at the end of the chain. Ask, how can I protect my open source project in that case? And first of all, disclaimer, the perfect CI/CD pipeline, unfortunately, doesn't exist. I'm sorry. So I'll take the case study on Pride in London. So Pride in London is an open source project. We're actually developing both the website and the mobile applications. And I'll showcase the tools that we're using on our CI/CD pipeline. This is some of the tools that we're using. I'll go through some of them. Before that, just going to explain where did I find those tools. So if you're not aware, on GitHub, you can find what we call the GitHub Marketplace. This is where you can actually find all those tools that are free for open source. So give it a go, have a play with them. Just to give you examples that for security, you will have all of the main vendors on it. Yeah. And yeah, if you select one, you will have on the pricing and setup a specific plan for open source is free. It should be limited for public repos, and it's easy to set up on the repository of your product. So when you go on your organization and on your GitHub repo, you should find those integrations within third-party access and install GitHub apps. You could see that at Pride in London, we've actually installed a lot of them, and we've also uninstalled a lot of them depending on the phase and the states of our projects, because we've been moving through, because this is a React JavaScript project, we've been moving to TypeScript, and some of the tools were a little bit confused when we had that hybrid state between React and TypeScript. So that's why we've deprecated some tools. We might revisit them on the long term and come back and reinstall them. This is the other bits. Depending on how natively implemented they are on GitHub, they'll fall under the third-party access tab or the install GitHub apps. One recommendation that I would tell you is when you're on the organization, the top level, go to the settings and one of these tools. And instead of doing all repos, you have the ability actually to cherry pick which repos you want to have the tool install on. That's also better for visibility. So let's start with what we're using. Quickly, I'm just going to introduce the Jamstack Trinity that we're using. So Contentful, Gatsby, Netlify. Why we're using those? Because they have a really good integration, the three of them. So we're using Gatsby. This is a React framework that allows us to use GraphQL queries to fetch from the CMS and to host it on Netlify. So really good integration between those three tools. So Contentful is our CMS. This is where we're actually hosting our data models. So this is just an example of the event models, just a schema, quite classic. This is where we have our content models. The other good thing is all the webhooks that they have natively. So as you can see, there's some for Netlify, Heroku, Travis CI, also Circle CI, Lambdas, depending on the infrastructure that you have. How to set up a webhook is quite simple. You'll have a post request with the webhook endpoints, and this is where they'll make the link with Contentful and your other services. We're also using Gatsby Cloud. This is where we're building the websites. So you have visibility, and also the good thing is they've implemented the Lighthouse reports from Google to give you visibility on how your results on performance, accessibility, and best practices. This is also where you would actually put your environment variables. Obviously, this is obfuscated here, but this is usually where during the construction, the build of your website, it will actually fetch those variables within the process, and you could actually see all of the builds on it. And if you're curious about the step that is actually going through, so usually it's the basics, fetching the commit from the GitHub repository, creating through the data model, and injecting the views and the query, and then pushing to Netlify. Netlify, this is where you're hosting the websites. This is quite classic on production and deploy previews for the development environments. And the same actually mirrors between Netlify and Gatsby, the different steps that you would see. So now let's go to the meat of all the tools that we have. So we're using CircleCI for the continuous integration. This is where we are running our unit tests. So usually all those tools will work following the same methodology. So when a developer will push or create a PR, it will trigger all these products. So CircleCI will also show you some metrics on how successful or if you have any failures in your builds. It will also show you, depending on your YAML file, your configuration, what are the steps that it will follow. So we'll spin up a Docker specifically for this project, prepare the environment variables as I showed you on Contentful. If you have any, I'll check out the code from your GitHub. Here, because it's a React project, we have yarn packages. It will still dependency. It will link the code, run the unit test, and then generate a coverage report. This is just to show you the config YAML file, exactly the same step, but a YAML file. We're using context. This is quite new on CircleCI. This is basically to separate your environment's variable depending on the type of application mobile. If you want to create a specific context for them, in our case, for the website, we're creating a specific context to have all of the environment variables linked to that specific context. And for security purpose, we're only allocating specific members to that context. We're using GitHub Actions as well for some of our projects. If you don't know where to start for GitHub Actions, I would recommend using some of their workflow templates, and more specifically, their security one that they have using CodeQL, which is actually quite simple to implement because they already populated the templates. So this is one example with Sonar Cloud, and we're also using the secrets that are hosted on GitHub. I will demonstrate after where the secrets are hosted, but just to show you the workflow file on it. And every time that there's a push or commits on Sonar Cloud, we'll actually fetch the results and implement it through the PR. That's another example with CodeQL. As I mentioned, this is one that GitHub can actually populate. The only thing that you need to add is in the language array at the bottom. Make sure that you have the proper programming language they're using in your project, and you should be good to go with that one. So I was talking about the secrets. So you could actually set secrets at your organization level. So if you go to your organization level and click on settings and then secrets, you can actually create those. You can host your secrets here. The good thing also is because it's at an organization level, you can make them cascade to specific repositories. So in that case, one example with the Sonar token, we've selected one specific repos using them. We're using CodeCov for the test covering. So same, as I said, same methodology. Within the commit or the pull requests, CodeCov will actually trigger a coverage report. It will go through each of the branches and specify a delta for each of the commits and the pull request. If you're actually adding more tests, it will green. If there's a bit of lack in certain areas, it will be red. And also, it will inject a little CodeCov report within your PR, so you'd have all of the results and delta directly visible on your PR. You will have all your tests, and it will also populate the CodeCov link. If you're not familiar with this and you want something a little bit more user-friendly, you can actually copy paste or just look at the HTML extension and have the whole report accessible through the HTML on your browser, which is easier. You can actually browse and see where it's covered, where it's missing, those areas. So some of the SAST vendors that we're using, one of them is called Code Factor. So this one is to check the health of your code base. This, in our case, is JavaScript. So the same, it'll go through each branches and each PR and let you know if there's any code that can be improved. Usually what they do, they'll add you a little bit of educational piece for the developer and have a snippet of code where you can improve that area. Another one that we're using is DeepScan. This one is specifically for JavaScript and the different flavors that you could find, so TypeScript, React, Vue, and others. The same, it'll go through each of the branches, give you some metrics. You have cool dashboards on it, and it will flag where there's something that you could improve. The good thing is if you click, for example, here at the top, array callback return missing, there's also an educational piece around how you could improve your codes, which is good for the developers. Another one also that we're using also for static code analysis is LGTM. That one is natively implemented through GitHub because GitHub acquired LGTM. Always the same. That one is actually providing with a heat map if you're a fan of those metrics and dashboards. And the same, it'll go through flag the piece of code that could be improved. The only difference here is the reference at the bottom is actually linking you directly to the official documentation, which in this case is the React documentation, which is good for the developers. And also, the cool thing is that you can compare your open source projects against other open source projects using the same programming languages and how good or how bad you're doing against them. A quick one that we're using, that one is no particular use for CI/CD pipeline. This is more for development purposes, but it's called pull request size. It's also good because we have that agile methodologies where we want to push quite often, so it's better if the pull request size is usually small. So you'll have a little bit of a little tag added within your labels using that integration. Another tool that we're using is the tree. The tree is a compliance Git-based policy engine, which gives us visibility on some of the compliance that you could have around open source. So for example, if you separate the dependencies from source code, if you have a git ignore file, ensure that you have code owners linked to your project. If you have any unrecognized committers and authors, might be good to do a little bit of cleanup within your team or the people that are maintaining your projects. So this is just to give you some more rules that they're checking against. This is just to ensure that you have that healthy compliance around your open source projects. And they've actually changed the UI recently, so this is the same, but with a more fancier UI, which is cool. Also, the good thing is when you raise, or the developer is raising a PR, you'll always check on the checks tab. This is where, if it's natively integrated, you will have more information. So, because you could tell actually that because you have that much tool, that you have to go to the console every time. But if you go to the check, and depending if it's natively integrated or not, you will have actually all the information on that place, because GitHub should be our source of truth for the developers. Another security tool that we're using is guardrails. So guardrails allow us to flag if there's any hard-coded secrets, if there's any insecure use of SQL queries, or any other security issues. The same, it will actually scan every branches and let you know and give you a score for every commits and branches. And it also let you know which developer pushed that commit. Now that we've seen the stats, and another important area obviously is the third-party components. So we're using quite a few tools around that one. The first one is Sonatype DevShield. So the difference with Sonatype and the other tools that I'm going to talk about after, Sonatype is raising issues, which means that to actually act on it, you'll need to look and change your the files by yourself. It's not a PR that will generate it compared to DEPENDABOT. So DevShield is based on the CVSS score, so it might be a little bit daunting for some if you're not familiar with how a CVSS score is performed or calculated. If you're curious about this is the table that is used. It's just one of I've cut it because it might be longer. This is the base score metric that you use to come with that CVSS score. If you find it too daunting, I would probably say start with dependency graph and DEPENDABOT from GitHub, because obviously it's natively integrated. It's available for every public repos that define dependencies in a supported language using a supported file format. As you can see, it's covering all of the main programming languages, and I know they keep adding new languages, so which is cool. How it works. So I would recommend at the top level, the organization level, go to your settings and security and analysis. The good thing is you can actually enable it at once for all the repos and for all the future repository, both the dependency graph and the DEPENDABOT. And also you can do the same if you're participating to open source or you have a lot of repository under your personal account. You can do the same actually if you go to your personal settings and security and analysis, and you can also enable it for all the repository that you have on your account. So usually GitHub will send you security alert digest every week just to let you know what are the security vulnerabilities that you have on your project. And the other one that they have is DEPENDABOT preview, and this is where it's interesting because they actually raise a PR for that one, so it's easier for a developer actually to fix the security issue. So instead, DEPENDABOT has been acquired by GitHub, so it's natively integrated. How does it work? Raise a PR, give you the version that you're using and the version that you should update to. There's a slight integration as well, and they have what they call the compatibility score. So basically, they will compare with other open source project, and if it doesn't break their CI pipeline, they will increase the score. So it gives you a little bit of confidence if you want to merge that PR. The good and use YAML config YAML file to configure all of the DEPENDABOT feature. This is just the one that we have at Prime London. So we're using for JavaScript. We have the update schedule weekly. And we have it for both production developments. So we have for the security updates and just in general, all the packages that we're using within the React ecosystem. A good thing also, they've added filters. So if you go on GitHub and you click on the little bell at the top right, you can create filters. So for DEPENDABOT, if you're using the query issue or pull requests and create that filter, then you will only see the one that have been raised by DEPENDABOT. Because with the dependency graph, you might have a lot of those alerts that are populated, but you don't have actions. And you make sure that you have actions with DEPENDABOT. The one that we're using is Sneak. So basically, we're using a couple of them because they're tapping in different database. So Sneak might have their own database. White Source might have their own database of vulnerability. DEPENDABOT might have their also database. So it's always good to have a couple of tools so you're sure that you're covering all the threats. So the same they will give you the vulnerability on the package and some remediation actions that you could do. There's also a Slack integration where you have the Sneak bot that will alert you if there's any vulnerability discovered in your projects. If you know how it works, so we're using webhooks for all of these tools. So you can see for Sneak, for Netlify, for Guardrails, for Circle CI. Usually you can go on their platform. They have an integration tab. They will give you the link to create that webhook. And if you go on Slack in incoming webhooks, so depending on how natively it's integrated, it's usually quite straightforward to install those, to set up those webhooks. Same as GitHub dependency graph and DEPENDABOT, it will send you weekly or depending on your settings, alerts through your email. For monitoring, we're using Rollbar. This is to provide real-time monitoring when we push the user is using our website, and probably some of the errors that we couldn't catch during the development. So it's always interesting to see those errors on the live production sites. And finally, to finish on the tools that we're using, we're also using Chromatic. This is not on the CI/CD pipeline part of the tools, but this because I'm going to talk about the ChatOps methodology, and we're using Chromatic for the storybook. So storybook is basically a way to have all of your components from React visibly available. So every time that you push a build, it will actually create a list of all the components that you have in your projects, which is quite cool because you have in one place all the components and the stories that you've built. And this is how it looks like usually. That's the classic storybook, where you have all the components on the left side. You'd have the how the component looks like and the snippet of code that you could use. This is great documentation for your developers if you have new joiners, but also for other stakeholders in your team. And obviously they also have a Slack integration, which is a good thing. So how on GitHub, because I've showcased a lot of tools, it might be a little bit confusing, but it all makes sense when a developer raises PR. So the developer raises a PR. This is where the magic starts, and where you'll see all the those tools creating or injecting, depending on how natively they're integrated. So you can see Gatsby Cloud creating a report and injecting it within the PR. You can see Sonar Cloud the same with that widget included in your PR. And at the end, when you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you will have all the tool chain. So this is just to show you how it looks like, because we have a lot of tools, so I had to scroll down to take the screenshots. So depending if you make it record or not, it gives you a visibility on if everything passed or is something is failing. This is the place where we have that visibility. As I said, when a developer raises a PR, you can go to the checks tab, and this is where you would actually see all this, that information without going to the console of a specific tool. How to get value from ChatOps. So I've mentioned ChatOps. So basically, we're using ops at Prime London, which means that we've integrated all the tools within Slack. So we have automated bots. Every time that the developer will raise a PR, we'll have all of that information fed back to our bots on Slack. So you can see with Circle CI, with Netlify, with Guardrails, with Rollbar. Also an example with GitHub. The good thing is, because it's visual, you can see the color codes. You can see like Amber with Courtesy, because it's still reviewing the PR. Or if something is failing, you'll see it directly on Slack, which is good because you don't have to go on all of the platforms. You have everything centralized on your PR, GitHub, and on Slack, and which also is a good thing because your developers are on Slack. And the documentation on GitHub. Yes. We do actually been using GitHub as our Jira board. So how does it work? We've created some labels, and this is the same as Jira or any project management tool with creating APPSEC and the tickets, and you can label all of this. So for example, if we're taking the homepage, this is our APPSEC, and all the cards that fall under that, which is the PR, we'll label it with the proper APPSEC name or helper, depending. We'll link it to a specific project and to the milestone. Milestone is basically the APPSEC on GitHub. And they have what automated dashboard, so you don't have to actually touch the card. It will move automatically depending on the status on your PR, which is quite cool. So if it's in progress, it will go on the progress tab. If the review is in progress, so if one of your developer is reviewing or approved, the card will move over the dashboard. And also a good thing is that these tools are providing these little badges. And I would recommend, if you're working on an open source project, is to actually add those badges on your README file, just to showcase the health of your code base, and also to attract maintainers, because it's always great to see that a project is doing great on that side. What about access control on GitHub? That's actually a good question. So at Pride in London, 2FA is mandatory. So all the developers have 2FA enabled. We also perform the member repository permissions. So everyone has a base permission of none, and they're allocated to specific groups. And those specific groups will be allocated to a specific repos. So we're making sure that a developer is only working on a web repo or on an app repo. And the same if we have outside collaborators. In the reviewers, we have also a code owner, which is allocated. We also have branch protection rules. So obviously the master, we've applied some branch protection rule because we don't want a developer to delete the master branch. We've also added to that branch some required tools. So those are the tools that I've mentioned earlier. And you could see, depending on what threshold you want to input on your PR, you can actually check all of them or some of them. So we've seen how to protect your open source project. Let's see, how can I protect my websites? So we know that improving the health and the quality of our code through secure application development is quite challenging, actually, because that APPSEC security posture is quite a lot, actually. You can see the difference to like static code analysis, security requirements, pen tests, threat modeling, security requirements. You don't really know where to start, and there's quite a few things to implement. Moving the security needle to improve the quality and health of our code is challenging. What I would recommend is do a gap analysis of what you have at the moment. If you don't have any SaaS tool or static software composition analysis like Snyk or White Source, just see your software development lifecycle and try to cover all of the phases, so which would be design, code, and build. And also try to find tools that have some interactions. So let's say, for example, you have Bad Bounty and a VDP, like let's say HackerOne, and then you have a vulnerability scanner like Detectify. We know those two companies have some sort of relationships, which would be easier. The same for SAST with Key1, and in design education with Secure Code Warrior. We know that those two companies have some partnerships. So when you have findings using, for example, Key1 or any static application security tools, make sure that you take, for example, let's say the top 3 and implement an education piece around those top 3, because you don't need to cover all of the findings that you have. It wouldn't make any sense for your developers. They will be overwhelmed with the findings. So it's better to focus on something and try to tailor custom your education piece around that. So some of the questions that you might need to think of is, what do you want to achieve? How do you want to achieve it? And also, which tools, platforms do you need for that? Because we know that the security platform quite huge, insane. If you look at that screenshots, there's quite a lot. So also an important point is to give context to developers. This is really important. So the security team can just drop jargon, because we do like a lot of abbreviation and jargons. So for example, content security policy, you might, what is this? Basically, this is just a whitelist of assets on the page. If it's not on the, if it's not whitelisted, it would not be loaded by the browser. Another one is server source integrity. This is just a checksum, which is appended at the end of the script. If the checksum is false, it will not be loaded by the server. Just throwing those jargon without giving any context will confuse the developers. But if you give them a little bit of a real use case, a real example, so let's say a couple of years back, there was this CoinHive incident. Basically, that crypto miner was implemented within a lot of governmental websites, and more than 4,000 sites actually were likely all victims, just because they didn't implement CSP and SRI that I mentioned. So it wasn't the website that were compromised, it was actually a script. That was the script, Browse Aloud, which was an accessibility tool, which is great because we're talking about accessibility. But the thing is, you can see that it's missing the super source integrity SHA here. Endpoint has been tempered. You could see in the top the little gibberish that you can't really read. If we deobfuscate that bit, you can see that actually it's starting a miner using your CPU. And this is the example that I've showed at the beginning. So giving context to your stakeholder is important. You can also sit down with your product owner, project manager. For example, if you want to implement the content security policy, you can start by doing this page speed insights just to see how good you perform. If you have on your page, I don't know, like let's say 150 requests, and you need to cut down all of the requests. This is a good exercise for both security because you're actually implementing the CSP and trying to actually cut down all of those requests. But also there's an instance on your user because obviously the page will load faster. So your PO and PM will obviously be also happy. So it's a win-win situation for both teams. As I said, the perfect APPSEC pipeline doesn't exist. Usually what we do is to look at this is the OWASP documentation. This looks great on the paper. It's usually quite tricky to implement because we don't really know where to start and how to implement all those tools. But also the thing is, once you actually implemented your pipeline, the other challenge is what do you actually do about all the data that you're having? How do you integrate the data? And what is usually the next step for that? How do you feedback to developer? What is the educational piece that you feedback to developer? Which area do you really need to focus on at the moment? So let's talk about the elephant in the room with COVID-19 impact. Obviously, this has been also an impact on cybersecurity landscape. So I say the cybersecurity projects often languish due to budget constraints, scarce resources, or because they're just lower priority in the long list of things that need to be done. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, this has actually pushed many of these initiatives to the forefront where they're gaining traction, which is a good thing. Same period last year, the number of spam messages, phishing, malware attacks that were related to COVID-19, also malicious URLs related to that, of WHO email, obviously that's a phishing email. You could see by the email at the top. These days, we usually see phishing email around vaccine, unfortunately, but this is the kind of threats that we're seeing more and more around that. So some of the recommendation that we usually do is to lock down the supply chain. We've seen it with the British Airways example, and we've seen how it's actually easy to implement this within your CI/CD pipeline. Identity and access management. As I said, for example, for our private London maintainers, 2FA is mandatory. Patch management, so not only for your third parties dependencies, but also for patching your servers, your OS. Security awareness and cyber hygiene. This is really important to have that education piece for your developers. Threat monitoring, IoT security, zero trust networking, and also that was important, social media compliance, because we know what can happen if someone is posting on LinkedIn a screenshot of what you're doing in the company. This could actually give some intel to attackers, so you might be mindful of what you're posting on social media. So one question for you, just food for thought, can you be enough creative to tackle the current threats and think outside the box? So I just would like to finish on, if I raise an interest for security, it's great. I want to learn more about security, great. So I'd say good OWASP. OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. It's a nonprofit foundation that gathers security and developers, and they create a lot of guides, guidelines around good practice for programming. You're familiar with the OWASP Top 10? I would say be a little bit more curious and go on the website and check all the guidelines that they have, because it covers way more than the OWASP Top 10 for the website for applications. So they have for serverless, for API, for mobile, for IoT. They have also books on threat modeling, and all of those guides and books are actually free. So a really good source to start with. If you're more on the hands-on labs person, I would recommend, so for the OWASP, there's this application that I've created, which is based on Node.js, which is called Juice Shop. And you can also use OWASP Zap, which is a proxy that you could actually test with do shop. You can also go to Hack the Box, which is giving you a lot of machines to actually pwn. So you have to find 2 flags, the guest flag and the root flag. It's also a good way to set up a mini security lab with a virtual machine and a Kali flavored Debian user. Another good resource is from Portswagger. This is the one who's the company is doing Burp Switch, which is also a proxy. So they do have a web security academy with good learning materials and labs as well, also free. Just need to create an account to have your progress saved on the website. And if you actually feel a little bit more confidence on your skills, you can have a go on Backrod or HackerOne. This is where you will be allocated to program, depending on the company, and you might actually get some money if you have good findings. That might be also a good way to get more familiar with security. And they also have a university and academies on their websites. Also, if you want to have more resources on security, I've actually wrote a piece on Medium called Keep Calm and Become a Security Engineer. I'm also running this initiative around Epic Women in Cyber, where I showcase different women who are working in the cyber industry. So if you know any women working in the cyber industry and if you'd like to showcase their work, please reach out to me. That would be great. So I'd like to finish on the key takeaways for that. So we've seen that open source can be a vector for large-scale cyber attacks. We've seen it with British Airways. Leverage the application available on GitHub Marketplace. You've seen it's full of applications that you could use and try to implement within your CI/CD pipeline. Because it's free for open source, as I would recommend you have a go, create some pet sample, or if you're doing open source, create a small pipeline and harden your GitHub security for your collaborators. Experiments. And also, a main one, please don't push your keys on GitHub. I like to finish with get secure, be secure, and stay secure. Thank you.
All right, great presentation. We have lots of time for question and answer period, folks. We have about 10 minutes or so. So if you do have a question, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. We have gotten a couple requests already from viewers who are wondering if you can share the GitHub link, and then if you could also share the SEC Labs blogs again, the DOS SEC Labs blogs again. So if you could share both of those. Okay.
So is this the GitHub Marketplace?
I'm seeing the medium.com, looks like your blogs from Medium.
Yes. Yeah, apologies. This is a screenshot. I can't really copy it. Let me just try to type it.
And while we're waiting for Sonia to go ahead and push that out via chat, just a quick reminder, if you do have a question, go ahead and use the GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. All right, Peter is asking about the blog with the OWASP, please. So maybe not this one in particular.
Sure, I would recommend to go on the OWASP website. Wait. Just go.
Okay.
Let me just type. Just this one.
Oh, that's great. All right. Thanks, Sonia. So check your chat box, guys. Sonia just sent out both of the links that have been requested. And okay, let's move on here. I've got a question. Is SCA a good start for an APPSEC program, as it doesn't generate as much friction as SAST tools with your devs?
Yeah, I would say it depends, because it's two different things that you'll be actually checking. So STA is a software composition analysis. So this would be tools like Sneak, like White Source, like DEPENDABOT. So this is checking your third-party dependencies compared to a SaaS tool. So let's say, I don't know, like check marks and all of those. They will actually check the health of your code base. So it will depend on, obviously, your budget. It will depend on your priorities for this APPSEC program. But yeah, obviously it's a good start. I probably recommend I guess you probably want to know for private repos, because for public repos it's free. I know some of the plans, they've actually let you use it for a certain number of repos. So you can have a go, just build your business case on it, and yeah, if you want to get the budget for those tools.
Excellent. Okay. Next question here. What are some success criteria to define when running a POC with an SCA vendor?
So I would say some success criteria would be obviously the fixes, the number of fixes that your developer engineering team is doing, because you might have a tool to scan all of your and flag all the vulnerabilities that you have on your third-party packages, but if you're not doing anything about it, it's not a great success criteria. So I would say, yeah, the number of fixes that you actually have. Yeah, that would be one of the main one for this one. And another one is probably if you have an educational piece with the developers, just to explain them what those vulnerabilities can provoke in your code base. So if you take, for example, the BA one or the Uber one, this, yeah, just give some context to your developers. This also could be a good success criteria.
Okay. All right, great. Here's another good one for you. What metrics do you have in place to measure the effectiveness of using these tools in CI/CD? Have you seen improvements in for your org as a result of using the tools you mentioned in the presentation?
Yes. So usually when you have those tools, I would say as long as it doesn't break the mini CI/CD pipeline you've created on your open source, you'll be good to go. Because I would presume that you have a suite of tests for regression. So not only user tests, but all kind of tests to actually cover your code base. As long as not breaking that pipeline, you should be good to go. So for example, with DEPENDABOT, they have this compatibility score. If it doesn't break the CI pipeline from other open source, they'll have a high score. So this will give you confidence on that side.
All right, great. So we have about 4 minutes left for question and answer period. So there's still time. If you have a question for Sonia, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. Next question, how do you manage regression testing to make sure everything is working on your apps after you've updated all the dependencies?
I would say it's quite the same. It will depend on the pipeline that you've set up. So if we take the Brain Engine example, when the developer raises a PR, you could see at the bottom of the page all the checks. So if all those checks are green, I would suppose that's enough to give you confidence to merge, and you see that it doesn't break your production website. So yeah, that would be a good indication.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, for everybody who's asked, this presentation is going to be available on demand, so after the webinar, so if you missed any or all of it, you will have the opportunity to see it again. We've had a couple folks asking if it will be available, so the answer is yes, 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 and we'll be sending it out in an email via a link, and we'll also have it on the devops.com website under the on-demand section, so you can go find it there if you missed the email for whatever reason. Okay, let's see, those are all the questions that we've gotten in so far, but I'll go ahead and leave the question and answer tab open in case we get any stragglers in. And while we are waiting to see if we do get any more in, this is the time that I normally would remind the folks that today's event has been recorded and it will be available later on demand, but I just did that, so I'm not going to do that again. I do want to do the drawing though for the $25 Amazon gift cards, so we'll go ahead and do that real quick. Our first winner today is Rachel C. Congratulations, Rachel. Our second winner today is Jackie W. Congratulations, Jackie. Our third winner today is Luis A. Congratulations, Luis. And our final winner today is Wayne M. Congratulations, Wayne. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check out your inbox. Look for it there. If you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. All right, we've not gotten any more questions in, so at this point I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions, and if we did not, for whatever reason, did not ask your question during the presentation, I think we got to all of them, but if for some reason we missed yours, please know that the folks at WhiteSource are getting a copy of all the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get an answer to your question. Let's see, and I guess that's about it. I do want to thank Sonia Moiset for today's presentation. Great job all the way around. Good information, great graphics, great everything. So thanks, Sonia. I really, really do appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.